Okay, so I have the great pleasure of introducing Rachel Callender. I met her some years back in Switzerland at Roche, and we were both giving a little talk, and I heard hers, and then I didn't want to talk anymore because I just wanted it to be by her. So we've grown to be friends. She's attended our summit, our healthcare professional summit, and talked to our healthcare professionals. She also worked with us for about 16 weeks, she and her husband Nate, in a small group of people to talk about language and its effect, and words that we remember and words that we'd want to forget, and words that kind of go on our head in a loop that sometimes hurt us and help us, things that we remember. So we invited her here. We insisted she come for as long as possible, and I'm really happy to tell you that you're going to love hearing Rachel Callender, and I'm thrilled that she and Nate are here, and thrilled that she's my friend. So welcome, Rachel.
Guys, I love you guys so much. I think this is the best community in the whole world. It is such a privilege to be here, and I've loved seeing you again, Pat, and yeah, what you're doing here is really special, and seeing some familiar faces that I've only just met on screens, and to see human bodies, it's so funny. When we met for the first time, they're like, you have a body! It's so beautiful, so it's lovely to be among you all, and meeting some new faces, new friends. It is so beautiful to have that instant connection, and I know a lot of you have said, it's like we've known each other our whole lives, because you meet each other at a really deep level, a real human level, based on this, I guess, experience that we have in common. I'm going to start. I don't have a connection specifically to muscular dystrophy Duchenne, so this talk is more of a general human-centered celebration of all life. Disability advocacy is something I've become very, very passionate about, and it comes from my own personal story that I'll share with you. But I also come from an artist's point of view. I'm just going to put this down. I don't need that till later. I forgot to ask, do I have a clicker? Oh, thanks. Excuse me. Technology is not my strong point, but here we go. I'm coming from an artist's point of view as well, and when I was 15, my high school art teacher told me that art could actually be a career. And this was the greatest news of my entire life to that point. And from that moment on, I was just like, I am going to art school. That's all I cared about. And so I finished high school and went straight to the Dunedin School of Art in New Zealand, which is where I'm from. I now live in Australia, so that's why you might be detecting a funny little accent. And I just had the most wonderful time at art school. And while I was there, I noticed that all of the work I was producing, it didn't matter what medium I was working with, was all coming from the same theme, the same space. I was really passionate about finding beauty in brokenness. I loved the work of Viktor Frankl and Carl Jung and the poetry of Khalil Gibran, where he's talking about holding joy and suffering together. And I was fascinated by this concept and wanted to make art that reflected that. So I'd find treasures in really weird places often. So I'd photograph dying flowers, like super close up, and I'd discover landscapes and hidden textures in there. Or I'd find this little treasure in a white feather on a muddy puddle, and I'd kind of capture these little moments, these little landscapes that make up the whole, that are often discarded or overlooked. And I found great joy in discovering these treasures. But while I was at art school, people would ask me, are you going to be a wedding photographer when you graduate? And I was just like, no, that is so far beneath me. I'm going to be a real artist. Thank you very much. And then to my, I guess it was a bit terrifying actually, and a bit horrible. I was photographing my cousin's wedding. I was still a student, so he got a good deal, and I was still using film. But I found, to my dismay, I was having the best time photographing this wedding. And I was like, oh dear, here we go. And so after I graduated, I started my own wedding and portrait photography business. And I named it Callender Girl Photography, which I thought was quite clever of me, you know, given my last name. I was like, this is so cool, I'm rocking it. And so I just started this business, and then a few months later, I had all my branding done and my business cards, and I had my phone number in the yellow pages. And a new business opened up just after me, a very different kind of business. And so I found myself on the receiving end of some very strange late night phone calls, wanting very different kind of services to what I was willing to provide. But all of that aside, I also got some real phone calls from people, and I got to travel all over New Zealand and often overseas, and I got to capture this most chaotic, beautiful day in a couple's lives. I got to capture connection and story and history and just the beautiful unfolding of people coming together in celebration and all its madness and chaos and beautiful moments. And so I just felt like I'd found my purpose. This was my thing, and I just loved it. And my business was flourishing, and I was winning some awards, and I felt pretty good about life, and I was set, you know, life was peachy. And then I found out I was pregnant. And this was not at all the plan. Like, this was in no way on the horizon of plan. Like, I didn't actually really like kids, like, to be honest. I didn't think my personality suited having children. I was a very free spirit, very unstructured. I was terrified of the state of the world. I don't really respond well to system and structure. And so I thought, I just can't handle having this trajectory of, you know, have a child, it goes to school, this then happens, and then the next thing, I was all about freedom and spontaneity, and I didn't think that I was up for this role, this life. And so this was a really challenging time, and I was terrified, and it wasn't until the 20-week scan where at this particular scan, we found out that this bundle of impending doom, as I had kind of experienced it, was going to be a girl. And I started to chill out a little bit at that point. I was like, oh, maybe I could, maybe. And we also found out that this little baby had a kidney issue. One of her kidneys wasn't draining, but the sonographer was super calm, super kind, and really clear about what was going to happen. She said, look, we'll look after you, we'll do some more scans, we'll keep you safe, and maybe this little baby will need some surgery after she's born, but she's all good, we've got you, go forth. And so I went forth, and I had this beautiful little baby, Evie Amor Callander, who was born on the 30th of March 2008 in Dunedin by a caesarean birth. And all of my fears in that moment when I first met her just melted away, and I was just instantly in love with this new little being, and also terrified at the responsibility of caring for this new life, you know. And my husband and I had the most perfect first few hours, just holding her and looking at her and being together as a family of 3 for the first time. And then we tried to feed her, and she couldn't latch. She had a really small mouth. And so we fed her by syringe, and she just kind of choked and then aspirated and sort of vomited and then just stopped breathing and started going a bit blue and floppy. So the nurse just grabbed her and ran out the door. And I was recovering from a caesarean, and the NICU ward was a whole floor above where I was. So I didn't see Evie or even hear about her, like, all night and until the next morning. And that night I was alone. I was in pain, I was afraid, I was frightened. There was a nurse that wouldn't believe me when I was pushing my button. I was like, it's not working. And she didn't believe me. I think she might have thought I was drug thinking, potentially. And then the next morning when the new shift of nurses came on, it turns out there was a kink in my little dripper thingy, so I hadn't been getting any pain meds, and I was just exhausted and frightened and so scared in this new environment. Machines beeping, people running in and out, different smells, weird lighting, all very terrifying. And it was in that space that a midwife and pediatrician came in to see us, and they said, look, we've done some tests on Evie overnight, and we're really concerned about her. We think she has a chromosomal condition that's incompatible with life. And I'm just like, what does that mean? Like, she's here, is she alive? Like, what are you talking about, you know? Incompatible with life. And if she does survive, which is highly unlikely, she will have severe mental retardation. She's got dysmorphic features. She's got congenital abnormalities. I didn't really know what these words meant, but I felt them. I felt them because I had seen Evie yesterday, and she was beautiful to me, a new soul in the world, full of potential. So this didn't make any sense at all. Like, my whole world just came crashing down, as I know a lot of you have experienced, when everything just feels different. I remember looking out the hospital window, and I'm like, I don't even recognize the landscape anymore. Has everything felt like it had changed, but people were still going about their regular lives. But my regular life had just kind of collapsed around me. And life was really difficult with Evie. We had so many moments where her life was hanging in the balance. And often it was because she would choke so often. She had respiratory issues. And she ended up in hospital a lot. But every time we were in hospital, what I noticed about her was that she seemed almost determined to survive. Like, she had this strength, this tenacity, and a quiet fierceness about her. And she drew out in me a mother I never knew existed, a person I never knew existed in me. I was able to handle really stressful situations. I learned a whole new language. When I first heard the words multiple ventricular septal defects, I was just like, what even is that? But then I could rattle off MSVDs like, I knew the language. But it takes time. It took time. I became someone I was really proud of. I could do things I never thought I would even could imagine that I'd have to do. And she defied all of the odds of everybody. She didn't even have the condition that they first thought she had, which was trisomy 18 or Edwards syndrome. And again, I'd never heard that word trisomy. And my pediatrician had an accent, an English accent, and I was like, I don't even know what that word is. Are you saying it right? I remember actually, I'm tangenting now. I was in Cape Cod a few years ago, and I was looking for lettuce. You're looking at me like the lady, actually. I was looking for lettuce, and I'll tell you, it'll get there. Anyway, I was looking around for lettuce, and I couldn't find any lettuce, and I asked the lady, the shop assistant, I'm like, I'm looking for lettuce. And she's like, what are you saying, honey? What are you trying to say? I'm like, lettuce, salad, lettuce. And I was like, oh, maybe they don't know what I'm talking about. And I was like, rocket, ricket. What do you mean, honey? And then she's like, oh, you mean arugula? And I'm like, nah. Turns out I meant arugula, but I didn't know. So I'm like, no, I don't mean that. I don't know what that is. So I didn't end up with any lettuce or arugula. So anyway, this is my point. Like, it's really difficult when you're coming to different places or you hear different words. Like, you don't understand. Anyway, that's a side note. I've never said that in a talk, so you guys are very lucky. But at this point in Evie's life, she's around 2 years old. And she is thriving. Like, she's getting stronger, and she hasn't been in hospital for about a year. And she's really growing, and we're being able to interact with each other. And I'm getting to know her and her character and her personality. But what I also realized at around this time in her life, that I think she has an electromagnetic sensitivity. Because every time we drove under electrical pylons that we had to go under every time we visited family, there's a piece of road that we went on a lot. And we'd come up to these pylons, and she'd just start crying, like a little switch went off. And then we'd pass under the pylons, and then she'd stop crying. And I was like, what is it with this road? Like, this is so weird. And then it was happening in supermarkets and anywhere there were sliding doors, like electric doors. And I was like, she's got superpowers. She's like a baby Magneto of X-Men. She is so cool. Like, I knew it. I knew she was magical, and this just proves it, This is so great. And I used this language to describe that particular phenomenon of Evie. And it was kind of lighthearted. But when I thought about her more, her character, the things she was teaching me and everyone around her, everything about her was really special, was really unique. Like the way that she just loved being on a beanbag and how she would just giggle, how she loved being in the water, how she flapped happiness like a little puppy. Like when she saw me in the morning, she would greet me just with flapping her arms and her legs and a big smile. It was the best way to start my day. How she just had this fragility and a pure joy that just drew people towards her, and she evoked a level of care and love in people they hadn't experienced before. And people just loved being around her. I loved being Evie's mum, and she was like 2.5 and she'd never had a tantrum. That's pretty spectacular. I could take her to work, like I had an office, a studio in the middle of town, and she'd come with me and just hang out with me. It was so great. And what I noticed with this realization of superpowers and this really celebratory, attitude, it was in stark contrast to what I was finding whenever I took her out into the street. Because strangers who met her for the first time, like the first thing they said when they saw her was, "What's wrong with your child? What's wrong with her? What's wrong? She looks a little bit different. She's jumping around in her little standing frame. What's wrong with your child?" And initially, because I knew people were going to ask these questions, they'd stare and they'd say, "What's wrong?" I'd sort of brace myself and I'd say, "Well, she's got partial trisomy 9 and partial monosomy 6, and she's got multiple ventricular septal defects, and she can't walk and she can't talk, and blah, 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 all of the other diagnosis words." And they kind of just glazed over and then walked away. And I just felt this chasm open up between us, this chasm of fear of difference. And I felt this sinking feeling in my stomach, like, I've just let my daughter down. Like, that isn't who she is. Like, that's not what I believe about her. That's the complete opposite. I've just really let her down. But with this new language and this new attitude of superpowers, the next time someone asked me, "What's wrong with your child?" I just said, "Nothing. Nothing is wrong at all. In fact, she has superpowers." And they looked at me like, "What do you mean?" And then I got to reframe that entire conversation about all the things I loved about Evie, how we could communicate without words. She was non-verbal, but we had so much communication. She was pro-communication for sure. I knew what she loved, I knew what she liked, I knew what she needed because she could tell me. She used her body, she used movement. She had one word, which was ooh, but she used the sound of her voice, the tone of her voice. And I knew if it was a happy ooh, or I'm in pain ooh, or I just want to go over here and do my own thing ooh, or let's make up a game together, Mum. We could connect on so many levels without words. And it was the most beautiful, powerful way to connect and communicate. We laughed together. She was the most beautiful child, and I loved being her mum. She was so much fun. But despite this newfound empowerment and superpowers and attitude, I was constantly forced back into that medicalized box of tick boxes and check boxes and lists and bits of paper that you have to fill out to get funding or any kind of support. And while these pieces of paper essentially are good at their heart, they're trying to connect with what a family needs and what a child can do, I was just broken by these pieces of paper, by these questions. Because I couldn't tick a single question, a single box on a 2-page document. Can your child do whatever? No. Can your child do something else? No. No, 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 no. And then I got that same feeling like when I handed in this document to the people at the other end, the official people, that they would think, well, here's a child with no value, she's a bit of a blob, there's no return on investment with this one, like, what are we spending this money on? She can't do anything. I was like, but it's not true, you're just not asking the right questions. Like, there's so much that Evie can do, but you're not giving me any room or space to write about it, to tell you, to teach you. And so I said to my healthcare professionals, I hate this form, I hate this document, I'm not going to fill it in. And I said, well, actually, it's probably a good idea because, might get some funding. And I said, look, I get it, that is important, but it's not the most important thing to me. I want the other people to know how much this child is loved, how much she brings joy to her entire community, and that there's so much to her than this series of questions. So I said, the only way I'm going to hand in this document is if I get to hand in my own document. And they said, okay. We don't know what that means, but okay. And so I made my own document, and I called it Evie's Awesomeness. Kung Fu Panda had come out the year before, and I just happened to absolutely adore the word awesomeness. I think it is brilliant at encapsulating the fullness of awesome. So I called this document Evie's Awesomeness, and it was a series of questions that I could already answer yes to about Evie. And as you can see in this document, some of the questions are quite random, quite strange, like, does your child laugh when objects fall near her face? Yes. And she loved that. It made her laugh. It was really fun. Or the first question, can your child play Sleeping Tiger and other great games? Yes. And this is a game that we made up together. And then the last question, can your child do assisted pull-ups holding her head up? Yes. And gosh, it was satisfying writing yes and putting a tick beside it. Evie does this very well using her dad to help her. Her record is 13 in a row. Impressive, very impressive. But what I discovered when I was making this document and writing my questions and answering yes, I just became so excited and so proud because I could see that Evie was developing and changing and growing in her own way, her own unique time. That couldn't be measured on any official document. But with this piece of paper, I could use this as a measuring stick only against herself rather than against normal. Because how damaging is it to measure ourselves against a normal that is so limiting? It doesn't even exist. And yet we're obsessed by it. So having this new way of understanding growth and change with this simple document was a true turning point for me in being Evie's mum and empowering her, and also communicating with the health team around us, because I knew what was important to Evie, what she loved, and so everything became through the lens of, is this going to be good for Evie and what she's already doing? Will this stretch her? Will this improve her own quality of life? Or are we just trying to bring her to normal? Because I don't care about that. I didn't really even care that she wasn't walking. I was just more focused on making the way that she was moving, which was scooting on the floor on her back. That's how she got around. But that wasn't safe for her because she was wearing the back of her hair out so much that her scalp would bleed. So it wasn't safe. So I said to the team, can we try and make this better? Because she's so happy, she's so independent, and that's what I value. That's what we care about. And so we tried a few things, and I tried putting skateboard wheels on a little bath seat. I thought that would be quite cute, you know, she could scoot off. No, it wasn't safe. Don't try it at home. Maybe it needs some funding or something. But we tried that, and we tried a few other things, and they didn't quite work. But then she said, oh, I know the guy who makes the soft headgear for the All Blacks, which is a very big rugby team in my country. Big deal. We'll give him a ring and see what he can do. And so he made this tiny pink version of headgear for Evie, strapped under her chin. She loved it. She could scoot around to her heart's content, and off she was. Happy as a happy thing. Completely free, completely safe, completely independent. And then eventually we kind of graduated to the standing frame, and we used them in tandem. So she could experience life how she liked to experience it. And here's another example of an awesomeness form. You might have met Krishna. I don't know if he's here at the conference, but his beautiful mum's in the front row. We made awesomeness forms for some of these kids. And so this is Alpa's awesomeness form for Krishna. And again, it speaks to capability and uniqueness. And even in these questions, you can sense that life is challenging for Krishna. But he has tenacity and fierceness and bravery. And he's doing some pretty cool things in the world. And I can get the sense that this will just grow. And this is his measuring stick. And it's a powerful piece of paper. So thank you for letting us share that with us, Alpa. And I've shared this concept of awesomeness forms all over the place, all over the world to different healthcare professionals, and it's super encouraging to see how people are embracing it. And on the left-hand side there, this is a document from a mother who received a neuro summary. And the first paragraph made her so happy. She put this on Instagram, that's how happy she was. Because the first thing she read was something beautiful about her son. Something about his strength, something about his personality and his character. That was the first thing that she got to read. It wasn't a list of diagnosis words or scary language or anything deficit-focused. And it can make such a difference, because when a family receives hundreds and hundreds of pieces of paper, these are the ones that make all the difference, the ones that have something human on them first. And then everything else that you're working on, that you're collaborating with together, that you're helping. And then the one on the right, speech and language therapist in New Zealand, is adopting this idea of making awesomeness reports. So every time she sees a family in her clinic, she will spend a few minutes asking them questions that directly lead to this human-centered conversation. She will ask them things like, what is has anything made you laugh this week? Or what is something new that your child is doing? Or what have you learned this week? Or what has brought you joy as a family? And these things are just as important as any speech and language therapies or techniques, because it's the whole family, the whole person. And the mother, when she received this document, said, it made me trust my speech and language therapist more, because I knew that she was seeing my child through my eyes, not just as a speech and language problem. And it's helping the parents to see their child in a broader sense as well, that they're more focused on character and personality and development, because sometimes we get so pigeonholed into fixing the problems of the diagnosis that we lose the whole child. They're still a whole child with visions and dreams and hopes and aspirations and fears and things to be proud of. So it's a simple way of really connecting with a family on a deep level. Sadly though, Evie's life wasn't a long one. But for 2.5 years, she was 100% compatible with life. It just wasn't for as long as we'd hoped for. And in her short yet remarkable life, she has inspired a dream, and I guess I've become her legacy in so many ways. She completely hijacked my wedding and portrait photography career, which I'm thankful for. The dream, I guess, was to photograph other children, to celebrate their uniqueness, their superpowers. Because I thought, if I'm feeling all of these big feelings and excited feelings, celebratory feelings, and seeing superpowers in her, maybe there are other families feeling the same thing, but they don't have an outlet. Maybe they feel like they're isolated or they're not allowed to speak about these things. So I went on a mission. I wanted to travel all over New Zealand to meet these children and to find superpowers. And so that's what I did. I traveled all over the country, and I made Superpower Baby Project, and that was published in 2014. And it's a celebration of uniqueness and diversity, and it's 75 children with a whole range of chromosomal and genetic conditions, and it highlights their superpowers and their abilities and a bit of their story. And then more recently, Nathan and we made the follow-up book in Western Australia, and again, it's stories and celebrating uniqueness and superpowers of children, older children from 1 right up until 19, and how they would describe themselves and what their own superpowers are. So it's been a beautiful way to use my photography and art to kind of continue that legacy of Evie and the things she taught me. And at this point, I'd like to invite you to snuggle in. I'm going to share a slideshow of the images that feature in both books. So you get cozy for about 3 minutes. Here we go. Enjoy. what do you see in those photographs? You can be brave and yell out what those photographs had in them. Like, what was in those photographs to you? What did you see? Joy, always the first one. This is my secret test. And it's always joy. You pass. Joy, yes. Joy, what else? Beauty, yeah. Yeah, exactly. Resilience, yes. Life, yeah, exactly. Big things, and I saw like this vibrancy and connection and fun and happiness, and these kids were so fun to be around. They were so cool. It was the best time of my life meeting these kids, and so many of them couldn't talk, but we could connect. And again, it was through movement and body language, and we just had the best time. Like, there were no expectations. I just got to sit with the child and experience how they experience the world and just capture it. And these images just emerged from that naturalness of experience together. And you've just thrown out some beautiful words. And the families use beautiful words when I ask them about the impact their children are having on them as families. And they said, look, it is really hard, but gosh, we love them. We just love these kids. They're teaching us unconditional love, perseverance, kindness, compassion. We're learning how to take every moment at a time, just one moment at a time. We're living more presently. Our values have changed. Like, everything has shifted, our perspective on the world. We've become more gentle together. We laugh more. And I just think that is so interesting, because that's not really the words or language or phrases that we'd usually associate with disability. Those words are more like retarded or dysmorphic, mutated, defective, abnormal. And they have a completely different feel about them, right? And I think these words take potential and ability away. And the more they're used over a person, they start to believe that that's who they are. But you can't be diagnosed with your identity. Your identity is so much bigger, so much broader. A diagnosis can impact how you experience the world, but who you are as a person is not a diagnosis, not your identity. Right after Evie was born, I was given this document. The doctors didn't know what Evie had. There was a period of about 2 weeks where they were testing myself and my husband, and genetics were involved, and this was the closest thing they could find to Evie's condition. It turns out I'm a carrier for Evie's condition, and what she actually had was called partial trisomy 9 and partial monosomy 6, which is basically a deletion and a duplication on 2 separate chromosomes. But this was the closest literature they could find, and I had a lot of unanswerable questions. And they couldn't tell me things that they didn't know, but they said, here, have this. And it wasn't written for a parent, but I think they were just trying their best to help me. But these bits of paper terrified me. They really did, because even just looking at this photo, that poor little girl looks like a specimen of some kind, and this is somebody's child, you know. And so I only understood about 80% of the words in this document. And if you feel comfortable, I invite you to close your eyes and imagine drawing the words that you hear me speak. These are the words that I did understand, but just imagine drawing this. The patient has dysmorphic features. The nose is long, fleshy, slightly beaked. The eyes are deep-seated. The mouth is small and triangular. The chin is small and receding. The ears are relatively large and square with abnormal folding. The neck is short with redundant skin folds. The trunk is asymmetric, the right side being more prominent. The extremities are thin and the fingers and toes unusually long and thin. She has a weak, hoarse cry. The tone is poor. She has stereotypical writhing movements of the arms and legs in an avoidance manner. The main features of this syndrome include mental retardation, microcephaly, a prominent forehead, a prominent nose. Those are the only words that I understood. But have you drawn some kind of elephant pterodactyl square monster thing? Like, is it a really weird thing that you've got on your head that you've drawn? Does it look anything like a human girl? No. This document described in such negative, medicalized detail the features I found so much beauty in and so much joy in. And so that was another piece of paper that hurt me, because it didn't describe my child. And although it might be medically relevant, it added trauma that was unnecessary to me. I adored Evie's deep blue eyes and her delicate fingers. The technical term for these delicate fingers is arachnodactyly, which translates from Latin to spider hands. I'm terrified of spiders, you know, and I live in Australia now, which is bonkers, but you know, I called them her fairy fingers because they were so soft and she was so gentle, you know, so maybe we could change that, medical people, you know, fairy fingers. I don't know what the Greek is for that or the Latin. Maybe we can talk. Anyway. And I get it, and I've been working since the Superpower Baby project was launched. That really did hijack my wedding and portrait photography career. And now I work full-time as an education consultant for healthcare professionals and parent groups, trying to bridge this gap between the two so that collaboration can exist, so a sense of partnering can happen, because we often are speaking different languages. And I know that healthcare professionals find it so difficult to translate all of these very important words that they use to diagnose into regular person language. And it's really tough. And so I've developed this language tool as one way to kind of help bridge that gap. And so, you know, all models are flawed and some are useful, but we have these axes, the positive, negative, jargon, and informative axes, which creates these 4 quadrants. And in the positive jargon quadrant, we have patronizing language or fluffy language. Now, it's really important to know that this comes from a well-meaning space. Like, people don't intentionally mean to be patronizing, unless they're mean and patronizing people, but generally people don't want to be mean and patronizing. They're trying to be kind, they're trying to say something that will fix the awkwardness of a situation, especially when they meet a parent for the first time and they've got something significantly difficult going on. You might have found that with your own family and friends, you know, how do you deliver a diagnosis from, you've just been delivered a diagnosis, and then how do you tell your friends and family about it? And then you might get this patronizing kind of cliche, fluffy language back. You might hear things like, special kids are only given to special parents, or I'm sure it's not as bad as you're making it sound, or I know somebody's cousin's mother's wife's husband's something who had the same thing and they were fine. Or, you know, belittling kind of avoidance language, or at least they don't look sick. Those kind of things, you know. They're trying to be kind, but they're just patching it up with a patronizing, sticky, fluffy thing. And this alienates and actually causes people to want to withdraw because it's too hard to engage, because it doesn't open any conversation up. And then there's the jargon negative quadrant, and this is just confusing, super confusing. And basically all of medicine just falls straight into that quadrant. The whole lot, 50,000 words just bleh in there. Maybe if you speak medicine it doesn't, but for most of the regular people who don't speak medicine, they speak regular person language, it's super confusing. And when you're learning a new language, it takes time. Like medical people, they take 7-ish years to learn all of those words and become fluent. And then parents are receiving a diagnosis and all of these words are just so big and so jumbly and they're so huge and scary. You can't hold that in. I remember the first time our pediatrician came to give Evie's diagnosis of partial trisomy 9 and partial monosomy 6, he was trying to explain why I'm okay in my body and Evie was Evie, with me being a carrier. So he was trying to genetically explain things. So he started to use a metaphor, which is always quite a good idea, as long as it's understood and the amygdala doesn't get hijacked halfway through and you've just completely tapped out. But he tried to use this metaphor as a library. He said, Rachel, your body's like a library. It's full of books, and all of the books have got lots of chapters and words, but some of the chapters and words have got muddled up. Nothing's missing, they're just muddled up, and your brain can unscramble it. So you've got chapters of Game of Thrones over there in Pride and Prejudice, which would be the weirdest book in the history of the world. But you're okay. But Evie, she's got not enough Game of Thrones, too much Pride and Prejudice, some of them are doubled up, there's whole chunks missing, and that's how she is. I'm like, okay, I kind of get it. And then I just sort of zoned out because he went into more technical language. And I remember I sort of was zoned out, but I remember thinking, your one job is to understand everything he says. He's a very important person. Just understand. I'm like, okay, I'm trying, I don't understand. And then he said 2 words that made sense. And I'm like, oh, I know those words, short arms, I know those words, I know what they mean. That's weird. Evie's got perfectly longish looking arms to me. What's he going on about? And then I didn't understand any of the rest of the spiel. But he said as he's walking out the door, do you have any more questions? And he's looking at his watch. And I'm like, yes. I bravely piped up. I think, yes. What are we going to do about Evie's short arms? Because that's the only thing I'd understood. And he said, nothing, they're fine, and then walked out the door. And in that moment, I just felt like the biggest, stupidest person in the history of the world. I felt so stupid and so scared and so frightened and so unsafe and so vulnerable that I was just like, I hate that doctor, because all of this was too much to hold, too many big emotions. It turns into an unbearable churn of pain. And I kind of threw it back at him, metaphorically. I didn't tell him I hated him, I was too scared. But I was like, I hate this doctor. And that sucks for him, because he is the person that has the knowledge and the capacity and the ability to answer my questions. So every time he came in to see us, I was just a brick wall. I was protecting myself from this feeling, unbearable feeling of feeling stupid around him. And so I was just like, yep, understand, all good, no clue. What a waste of time. And when time is one of the most precious commodities in the whole system of health, confusion is causing so much damage. You can't make any decision when you're confused. You can't make good choices. You don't know what's going on. You can't even connect to people. Confusion is so damaging. It's so important to not leave a room with more questions than you started with. And it's important to take time learning this new language, because it is overwhelming and it is scary. And there is grief involved, because every time there's a diagnosis, there is a death. There is a loss of a child you're expecting, a life you're expecting, a journey you're expecting. You lose something at diagnosis. And confusion just puts extra pain on top of that. Oopsies, sorry. And then there's this destructive language, this informative negative language. People understand this, but it hurts unnecessarily. And this is soul-destroying language. Words like incompatible with life, retarded, spastic, dysmorphic, mutated. Like, imagine being called that, abnormal, defective. You know, it gets into your spirit and it hurts you. And initially, after there's a diagnosis, I don't think you need to use those words anymore. They take ability away, humanness away. But there is hope, because there's an empowering quadrant, that nice yellow one. Positive, informative. And this kind of language is kind, it's clear, and it's curious. It does less talking and asks powerful questions. And the first time I experienced this kind of language was with a clinical geneticist. We went to his office and he sat us down. He was a beautiful, friendly, open man. And the first thing he did was ask a question. He didn't rattle off big information or anything. The first thing he said was, Rachel, what do you know about chromosomes? Great way to start a conversation, right? Cut to the chase. What do you know about chromosomes? And I said, honestly, I could not even draw you one. He said, all right, let's draw a chromosome. So he's there drawing some little squiggles. And then before I know it, I'm like, oh, I get it, the short arm. So I'm like, wow, how cool are chromosomes? I didn't know they had arms, short or long. Anyway, it took him about 20 seconds to explain that to me, and I'm like, I gotcha, I'm with you. And I felt so cool because I'd learned something. He had taught me something. His knowledge was transferred in a way that I understood, that I could grow with, I could learn from, and I felt empowered by. And that did not take more time. There's a misconception in medicine that asking questions and having good communication takes too long. Oh, it takes too long to care. I'm just going to rattle off my spiel and be done. No way. It has to be different. We can be better. We can ask questions. We can be clear, kind, and curious, and fast. That changed everything for me. And so many families, when we're interviewing for the book, they're just looking for something positive. Not fluffy positive, but just some humanness, something to connect to, something that they can hold on to as an anchor point. Because the phrases are scars that are left behind, and they take a long time to heal if they ever do. And it's not intentional. I know this for a fact that healthcare professionals don't go to work to do a bad job and to hurt people. They're trying their best as well. And this is where this work of partnering and having a sense of allyship together with healthcare professionals and families and parents, and it needs to be collaborative. There's so much we can learn from each other. And parents can grow and children can grow through their own experience of life. You know, this dad, he says, the most traumatic event that's ever occurred in my life, which was the diagnosis of his son's Angelman syndrome, has given me the greatest sense of purpose and identity for me to step into. There is a transformative power in discomfort and conflict if we allow it, if we stop denying it and stop avoiding it, if we lean into it and ask ourselves some powerful questions. What can I do with this? Who can I be in this moment? And that can take time. That's a whole other journey. But coming back to this kind of language with the empowering focus, when I say clear, kind, and curious, I do mean like the power of asking questions. And I mean, there's a million questions we could ask. And so I've broken it down into categories, like this category of 4 overarching questions. What are you proud of? What do you hope for? What are you afraid of? And what do you need? And I guess this is like a human-centric SWOT analysis sort of a test. You know, SWOT analysis measures strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. This is a very similar kind of framework, I guess, but with a human-centered approach. Because when we ask these questions, what are you proud of? What do you hope for? What are you afraid of? And what do you need? We're speaking to the dignity of a person, capability, vulnerability, and the humanity of a person. And in workshops that Nathan and I facilitate, we get groups to come up with as many different ways of asking these 4 questions. Because those 4 questions are quite confronting on their own. If I was to ask you, Alpa, what are you afraid of? You'd be like, too big, I don't know, I don't want to talk to you about it. But we need to get more nuanced, break it down into smaller pieces. And that's where trust can be built, respect can be built, and care can be delivered super specifically. Values of a family are revealed. Dreams of a child with Duchenne are revealed. Can we deliver our care to facilitate that dream, that hope, that fear, and that need? And I had a conversation with Rich this morning, and he shared this gem of wisdom with me. Thank you, Rich. That was a great conversation about Albert Einstein. You know, if he had an hour to solve a problem, I'd spend 55 minutes thinking about the problem and 5 minutes thinking about solutions. If we can apply the same kind of thinking to how we interact with each other, asking questions, asking really, really good questions, then the answer is quite simple. We reduce assumption, we reduce judgment. We're actually aligning care and values and innovation and creativity into a really powerful space. And I think this is when the greatest change and transformation can occur, if we really listen and answer those, or ask those powerful questions and really listen. See, look at these questions. There's too many. Like, you can't even read them. That's how many there are. And if you're interested in having a copy of the slide, like, I can send it to Pat's team. Not Pat, because she doesn't answer her emails. It's okay. But that's not true. She does. But if you're interested, I can get you a copy of this to start practicing. Like, this is a toolbox. All of these questions are a toolbox of communication. And it's really beautiful and really powerful. Like, I'll just read a few. How's our time going, Pat? I have no idea how we're going. Okay, great. In the what are you proud of category, I'll find some of my favorites. What is already working well? Great, like imagine a family or a boy, young man answering that. Great, let's continue to work on those things, and how can we deliver care to make sure that you can do those things as long as possible? What do you hope for? Like, do you have any dreams? Are you looking forward to anything? How can we facilitate you doing that thing? What are you afraid of? What is worrying you the most? What keeps you up at night? What is most concerning you? What is the one thing that you keep thinking about? And then just keep asking those questions. And then what do you need? What is one thing that makes your life harder than it needs to be? What is one thing that would make a day in your life just a little bit better? So you get the sense that these powerful questions can be used in really amazing ways to deliver care and therapy in a powerful way. I love this photo. This is my most favorite photo in the whole world. And I'm sharing it with you because this is the other side of grief, the other side of pain. I never imagined that there would be a beautiful side to trauma, and it sort of comes full circle to holding joy and suffering all at once together. From my art school days, you know, finding beauty in brokenness. This is me scattering Evie's ashes at the bottom of Aoraki Mountain, the cloud piercer in New Zealand, in Lake Pukaki, and it is that colour. And this photograph to me is gratitude and hope and connection and freedom and just utter joy, which is weird to say about grief. Like, I've learned so much from her, and I'm so grateful. You know, as a mum, my experience of parenthood means I get to share her life and the lessons with so many people, thousands of strangers, and that to me is an utter privilege and a joy. So when things are falling apart, can you imagine a beautiful side to that? And it might be too hard to, you might not even be able to, but maybe, just maybe, consider that there is one, that there is a beautiful side somewhere in the future. It is such a privilege to share this space with you. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you, Pat. I love this community. You know how much I love this community. It's very, very special. I look forward to meeting you more throughout the conference. Please come say hi. Thank you so much.